Okay, so look, good morning and welcome if you're either in the live meeting or watching the recording after the fact. This morning's session in the 2022 60 PD series is on podcasting and on either distributed podcasts that people can subscribe to and how to create them, or embedding audio within subject sites, which is also particularly popular here at CSU. So I'm joined today by Kim Bailey from the Centre for Law and Justice. So welcome, Kim. Thank you for joining me today. And we are going to have a look today at a few different bits. We'll have a look at explaining why there is some confusion around the term podcast and how it's, I suppose, comes down to more how people want to use the audio at the end. And we've got some exemplars of how they're being used in subject sites. We're going to have a look at the way that Kim uses podcasts, and in particular, we're going to have a look at two platforms that you can use to create audio content. One is the cloud-based podcast creation tool, Anchor.fm, which luckily for us, Kim is a prolific user of, and we'll be able to see some of the ways in which she uses that content. I will take us through how to create content in that platform. And again, this is glorious because Anchor is such an easy tool to use that you can literally pick it up with having never done any of this stuff before and not really needing to know much at all in terms of beyond getting a link to the content at the end of it for people to subscribe to. And then you just keep adding things to it and they will be added to your channel. We'll be making contrasts throughout this between the difference of subscribing to content, linking to your content, or embedding your content, and how you want to make it accessible to others. And seeing how we go for time, basically. I've collected at the end of the slides some teaching tips and ideas when you're making cast content, and the same applies really for video, but the same for audios. Some tips and tricks to do with using podcasting platforms. And of course, we don't really have that many in today's live session with us. So if you do have questions along the way, comments, either pull me up, stick your mic on, and we'll engage with you directly at that point, or put them in the chat pod, either or. As we're going, look, I'm going to add the slides for today into the chat for you so that if you want your own copy of things, you can certainly do that. And I've also got the quick guides for Panopto and for Anchor that you may want for your own use. So you can certainly access those there, and I'll add them again at the end if we have other people in. All right, so look, the first thing I like to do when we talk about podcasting is bring up an example I get fairly regularly where people will give me a new term for something that I hadn't even thought about. The most recent one for me was I started talking about podcasting and a lecturer pulled me up and said, "Oh, you mean sound grabs?" And I said, "Oh, what's that?" And basically they had always associated the term, what they thought podcasts were. They called them sound grabs. Other people call them sound bites. So other people call them, audio grabs or embedded audio. But essentially what we're talking about is someone's created digital audio somehow, recorded that content, and then made it available somewhere. That's probably as complicated as I want to get with this. Although, if you press me, the actual definition of the term podcasting involves the act of both creating the content and making it available for subscription online. Okay, so if we really want to get into, letter of the law stuff, podcasting is about making that content available for people to subscribe to and access somehow. It also generally involves the prospect of episodes or creating a series of content rather than just one-offs. So there's a distinction there with an embedded piece of audio that sits in your subject site. As we said, you've got to make that available to users somehow, distributing it somehow. And that's where we start to get into talk about podcasting platforms, which will host your podcasts. And then for users, your audience, to be able to get hold of that content, they're going to need to subscribe somehow using tools that are often referred to as aggregators, feed aggregators, and there are 1,000,001 different tools that people use. Some of the more common ones that I'm sure you're familiar with are things like iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and that list is just goes on and on and on. I'm going to show you a free podcasting aggregator a bit later on today that's for mobile platforms called Pocket Casts, which is a pretty special mobile app that's for free and allows you to subscribe to just about anything you like. And that's included in the quick guides that I've provided today. So we'll have a look at that as well. I'll just close some windows in the background so I declutter. Okay, something to think about for a moment before we get into looking at how Kim uses podcasts is something we've been thinking about more and more lately, is particularly in light of the real focus, it's not just at CSU, but across the sector, in adding more and more and more content to our core learning materials or our key learning materials, and adding more and more material in there. It could be interactive content, it could be other ways to engage with the materials, visual, embedded video, but we keep adding more and more materials into core learning content, which just becomes part of the ongoing materials, that somehow there's an implicit expectation on the students to just consume all of that and make meaning out of it. And potentially, best case scenario, I guess, for the purse string holders, we get to keep using it session after session. So it just becomes an ongoing valuable resource. And the problem with that is the feedback that we get from students is there is so much content for them to consume. They're not really sure about, firstly, which parts hold the most value to them if they can't get through all of them. And secondly, this idea of authenticity or the teacher voice. Just simply adding content to your learning materials doesn't equate to teacher presence. I'm sorry if that's, that message is conflated or confused through various initiatives, but it is not. It's just content. And it's really the agency of the teacher in the delivery of your subject that equates to teacher presence. And we talk about that, I suppose, in light of podcasts, because they present an opportunity for you to inject a dynamic aspect to your delivery. And we don't have many channels to do that with online delivery. We've got Zoom, we've got announcements. Maybe if you're adding something to your landing page periodically, that's about it. We don't really have a lot of dynamic delivery possibilities put in front of our teaching staff. So that's why I like to really, for lack of a better term, I suppose, flog this horse, because podcasts give you an opportunity to do something like this. If you were to put this sort of statement in front of students that says, each week through this subject, I'm going to be adding in a new podcast that I'm going to record to the channel. You don't have to access it, but it's going to have things in it like, maybe I'll have interviews with people in the industry, just to catch up or a chat with them, for them providing their perspective. My own, take on one of the key readings, for example, that's in there, and maybe how I found it particularly difficult to grasp parts of it, or the key things that I took away from it. Your upcoming assessment, here are my thoughts on maybe how you unpack some of that, etc. If we've got current affairs going on in the world that are connected to what's going on, maybe even the idea of a concept lecture if I was going to talk for 5 minutes just around one thing. None of these ideas individually, I would suggest, are massively groundbreaking. I'm sure that a lot of you are doing some of these things in some form or another. What is a bit different is that more often than not, we just drop this into our learning materials and we say this becomes part of the content of the subject, this growing mass. So what I'm suggesting maybe when we think about podcasts, and particularly putting them into a channel, is we move away from just dropping them into your learning content and getting the students to tune into this thing, which will help put them in touch with you, that relationship building aspect, but also get your authentic voice on how they can really engage with what's in the subject. It's just an idea, but I think there's real opportunity there. And with that in mind, I want to kind of get into some exemplars on how podcasts are being used. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples where some of our teachers have done exactly that. And then I'm going to throw over to Kim for her to show us how she uses Anchor. So look, the first one I think I'm going to bring up is another practitioner from the Centre for Law and Justice, Hayley McEwen. She tried for a session the idea of putting together a podcast channel that specifically looked at issues and mostly concept lectures around the subject that she was delivering, equity and trusts. She used Anchor, which is a tool we're going to look at how to use today. And she created a series of brief recordings. You'll see that each of them is sort of 10 minutes or less by and large, which really were concept lectures. Her take explaining particular pieces of the content, and she put them into that channel. Now, since then, while she hasn't taught that subject necessarily, she has had requests from other areas, other practitioners, and students for similar sorts of content to be made available to them, unpacking other parts of other subjects. So she's made the recording. It goes into here. I'll see if I can.
Welcome to episode 5 of Equity and Trusts. I'm Hayley McEwen.
No, I'm not going to play all of it, but basically with a headset, sitting in front of her computer, and let's say 9 minutes for the recording and 5 minutes to work with a transition, like a bit of an audio blurb at the beginning like that, it was then published. And then it sits there to add value, I suppose, later on. And so she made that series to, I guess, augment what was going on in the subject. In a similar vein, from the medical radiation sciences team, Tani Nelson used, and I'm just going to find Tani's, I promise. Maybe if I get the link from here. Tani. Tani did the same thing, but she embeds it into her subject site. And her particular take on this was to create a podcast channel called Professional Button Pushers, which is how she affectionately refers to herself and her other professionals in medical radiation science, where she basically decided that when she started as an undergrad going into the field, she found it fairly intimidating. She's close to this subject matter in particular. So she then recorded a series of podcasts unpacking different parts of that experience for her and what it was like as a beginning professional in the field, just adding them to her podcast channel. And she continues to use this and embed this within her subject site. And again, this is not, I suppose, a highly polished professional piece as such that someone has spent hours working on the production of and trying to generate an income from. If you become a podcaster of that kind, more luck to you. But these are just teachers that basically have decided to use this tool to create a different form of content to get it out to the students. I think with that in mind, this is a really good opportunity for me to throw across to Kim Bailey and just to get a bit of a take from her on why she likes the medium of podcasts and some examples of how she's been using it and anything else that she thinks is of value for you to listen to. So good morning, Kim, and thank you so much for sharing your insights into podcasting with us.
Oh, good morning. Well, I started podcasting, I guess, a couple of years ago when Lachlan put the idea in front of me, and it's been a very helpful learning strategy for my subjects. I teach undergraduate Bachelor of Laws degree, a couple of subjects in that, all online, so our students are always online. And I think the thing I've noticed the most in terms of trying this methodology is that it's something that I can sustain and that I can do on an evolving basis because the law changes all the time, so it's not difficult for me to update podcasts. But most importantly, our students really love it because it gives them mobile, accessible auditory learning that they can do in the car, on the train, or however they want to hear it or digest it, which comes back to us in SES feedback. It's been incredibly popular and very well received. So there's a couple of ways that we are using it in the Bachelor of Laws program. I'll just, Lachlan, if I can share the screen, would that be okay? Yep, there we go. Okay, great. I'm going to just show you our residential school hub site. So we're no longer residential school, now intensive school. So one thing we've done with our podcast is that we have a central platform, which is the residential or intensive school hub. And on that goes a lot of our material from each and every intensive school. But we've been building a library there for some time now, over the past 2 years, of interviews with the profession. And this includes barristers, judges, solicitors, legal aid lawyers, judges associates, all sorts of people, who's who in the legal profession. And just very candid conversations with them about how they got to where they are, what they think is really important about their work, their tips and strategies for survival in the profession. And it actually gives the students a really lovely, authentic narrative and interaction with the profession that they otherwise might not have access to. So that library is there, you know, in perpetuity, I suppose, and it's there for them to access on the basis of whatever they're interested in listening to, rather than embedding it in subject sites. But some of those go for 5 to 10 minutes, others up to half an hour, depends on who's speaking and how much they wanted to say. So that's one thing we've done with it. Another way we've used the podcast is in terms of to make sure you can still see my subject, is in terms of assessment, feedback and feed forward as well, which is in this subject is an example. So in this subject, I have provided a very short grab of assessment feedback. So I have a Padlet wall in each of my assessment folders, specific to each of the assessment tasks. And on that Padlet wall, students can post any questions that they might have about upcoming assessment, or any issues they're having finding resources or whatnot. Once I start getting a bit of traffic on there, whether it's from the Padlet wall, from the discussion board, or from private emails with students, I've collated a series of information of frequently asked questions that I mightn't have made explicit in my teaching about an assessment task that needs to be unpacked a bit further. So I recorded a short podcast and embedded that here. I think it's about 5 minutes, dropped it into the Padlet wall, and then all of that information is in one place for the students to be able to access and hear. So it's just a bit of outline or further guidance for them in terms of what the expectations are for the assessment. That can also be done in terms of feeding back as well to the whole cohort, which is a really useful tool as well. Students really like to know with assessment what the average mark was, what the highest mark was, what the lowest mark was, without identifying who got that, and what the common pitfalls and mistakes were on a whole cohort level, as well as the individualized feedback that you're giving them, because that often reassures them that, you know, they're not alone. A lot of other people made the same mistake or found this task difficult for these reasons, and so forth. So podcasting feedback that way can be a very quick and very efficient way. It doesn't require you to do PowerPoint slides and all the rest of it. You can just very quickly, in 5 minutes, record some helpful feedback and drop that into your subject site. Another way that we've been using the podcasts are concept lectures, which can you see my subject site there? Have I lost you? Yeah, great. Okay, so I have embedded them. I've recorded them on Anchor FM, and then actually embedded them in the subject site as well, which means that students can access these concept lectures through their learning materials in the subject site, but they can also access this by doing a search of the topic and the subject name in Spotify or Apple or whatever platform they want to access it on, which means they can be listening to it outside of the learning management system, and that's very popular with students. These concept lectures are essentially, they're not a traditional lecture in the sense that I'm not regurgitating huge amounts of content. They go for between 20 and 40 minutes at the most, because that's all really you can digest in auditory. They link what's going on this week in the topics with upcoming assessment, and also what's going on in the marketplace in terms of litigation. So in this subject, we're looking at legal ethics, and we'll be talking about recent ethics cases that might have come up this week, and trying to relate the topic for the week to what's actually out there in the marketplace. The great thing about these concept lectures is that you have a shell document like you do for your normal lecture notes, and I can update that shell document as the year progresses or as the subject comes into a new session, adding new cases or contextualizing it with new assessment, changing it. And the re-recording of it is really a simple exercise of 20, 30 minutes tops. It's not a major video production that a lot of the usual recorded lectures are. So it's a really effective way of keeping your material relevant, engaged with the outside world, and mobile accessible for students. So that's a really big win as well. Something else that I found really helpful, and I know, Lachlan, you're going to go to Anchor FM and show everyone how to use it, but I also get a lot of feedback for my teaching through using this strategy. So I can see how many plays I've had per episode for my podcast, and I can also see in this graph the peaks and troughs of what they're listening to the most, which helps me. And ironically, no surprises, it's around assessment time that we have a really big uptake in the listening to podcasts. But it's helpful for me to understand too what is meeting the student need and what they find the most interesting as well. So the data that you get with a platform like Anchor, which is free, is really helpful in informing your learning and teaching. So Lachlan, was there anything else you wanted me to talk about?
Look, I think that's good for the minute. I'll probably throw back to you for your input on a couple of other bits and pieces that I'm going to show now. But I think it's probably a good idea if we get into looking at Anchor, the platform itself, and how people create that content, which is probably what they came for in the first place. So I'll get into that. All right. A point that I just made in the chat pod while Kim was showing us, we have several different ways that people were able to access the same recording. Essentially, is that you saw an embedded media player that we get from Anchor, basically, that we can drop into our learning materials, and then they just click on play and listen to it in situ in the subject site. We have the subscription, basically, where people are given a link to subscribe to the podcast, and every time there's an update or an episode, it'll get added to their podcast player, their aggregator. And the third one is we also get a link each time from Anchor when we make a podcast. And you could just send that in an announcement each week, for example, just saying the latest podcast is now available for this week on Anchor. Here's the link. So there are different ways of getting access to this. All right, so look, let's have a look at Anchor. If I'm not sharing my screen, I will. Okay, that should be up now. All right. I'm going to open this in a different browser so it doesn't think it knows me, but I'm signing up for a new account to anchor.fm is the address we're going to, anchor.fm, into your browser. It'll take most account types from other services. If you've got a Google account, that's probably the easiest way. Just sign in with Google and it will give you on the spot your own channel in Anchor to start adding content. I will point out that the free version that we all basically are using, the limitation is you get one channel. There's no way to differentiate the content or organize it into various channels or kind of, folders or anything like that. Everything that you add is a new episode within the channel. That is the only real limitation from my perspective of this tool. So if you were going to teach multiple subjects, for example, and have podcasts into different subjects, you need multiple channels. That's the long and short of it. So you'd be creating potentially different Gmail addresses for different subjects, maybe. Just something to think about. All right, so look, let's get into this. I've signed in with a Gmail account that I just created on the spot. I want to get straight into making an episode. It opens up this dashboard, which is very, very straightforward. I got two options. On the left, I can start recording the audio. It's going to pick up my headset, etc., and go from there. Or on the right-hand side, if I've recorded audio somewhere else, I can upload it in here, drag it into here, and make it part of the episode. Now, this has real legs when you think about how many people are using things like Zoom and getting audio from Zoom, for example. If they're using their mobile phone, and Anchor has a mobile app, which is basically a recorder. You turn your mobile on and start your musings, your recollections, etc., that you want to have for this, and it will be uploaded into the channel for you to use with your podcast. So there are multiple ways to do this. For the point of today's kind of demonstration, I'm going to start recording. It's asking, is this the microphone you're using? Absolutely, that's the microphone we're using. Let's go and start recording. So the time is on. I'm saying, right, welcome everybody. This week's episode, we're going to be looking at blah, 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 blah. And on you go, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever. And we stop. It's now processing the video at that point. And we're going to get some options with this audio. You'll notice the plus sign over here on the right-hand side. what this is looking for, we have kind of two halves to the screen to think about with Anchor. Left is sort of the creation. On the right is like our continuum or timeline for the episode. So if I hit plus, it drags that over here. This is what our final episode is going to look like. So at the moment, we've got that bit of audio. And start recording. So the timer's on, saying, right, welcome everyone. Okay, so that's already added the audio into our continuum. I want my podcast to have some funky music at the beginning, for example, which is all fits under this kind of category of transitions. And there is a huge category, library here of different sound bits that you might want at the beginning or middle, end, whatever. I'm not going to play all of these. There are hundreds, all right? So I'm just going to grab one of them and add it into my episode. I don't want the episode to start with me talking and then the sound, so I'll just reorder those. So there's my transition, and then I'm going to start talking. You can add as many other recording pieces. So if you wanted to do your episode in bits and add one bit here, and then, it depends how far down this rabbit hole you want to get. If you want to make a longer recording with different parts to it, you certainly can. But for today, I've made my audio. I've got my transition. I'm now going to preview the episode. It's telling me that it's 17 seconds long. Everybody, this week's episode, we're going to be looking at blah, 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 blah. All right. So there is my incredibly professional podcast ready to go. I'm going to save the episode. It's asking for a few details. Let's give it a title. Lachlan pretending to make a podcast. A description of sorts. You'll notice these bits are compulsory. It's a blurb that they're going to see if they open up the Anchor website underneath each. In this one, blah, 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 you can put in, there's a few different editing options, bullets and other bits, links. And then there's a few options underneath, which are really to do with tools like Spotify. I don't really spend any time on any of that stuff. I just want my audio published. But you can then customize if you're making it part of a series, for example. So I might say, well, this is the first season of my podcast, and it's episode 1. And then you can also categorize what type of content's in there, or add a thumbnail in that goes next to your image. All right, let's go for pictures. There's me. Let's do that one. Perfect. So I now have, did it actually choose that or not? Yep, it did. All right. So my podcast on the net, once I publish, will have this thumbnail next to it. And that detail, season 1, episode 1, there's a description, etc. I can now click on next. I haven't given my channel a name yet. So it asks for a name there. Okay, podcast. I'm not going to worry about that. We'll say, broadly speaking, that it's to do with, comedy. Yeah, that's about right. And the language it's in, okay, fine, English. And continue. Oh, it wants a description. No, forget it. Oh, it won't let me do it without choosing cover art. Okay, fine. You only have to go through this process, obviously, the first time that you use it. You can go back in later on and change your cover art for your podcast, so to speak. I just want to really click through to the actual published audio content so we can see what it looks like. So we'll just wait for that to finish. Yep, I'm ready to publish. Let's do it. Okay, it's going to be available on Spotify shortly. Oh dear. Okay. Right. Now what it's basically saying is that my channel on the net with all of my podcasts in it is available through this link. And I also get my RSS feed to give to my students to subscribe to the podcast. Right. So firstly, what I'm going to do in another browser tab here, I'll just open up the channel page so we can see what that looks like. There's a home page now for my channel. And as I add more episodes, they're going to get added to this list. So that is now live. And every time I make a new podcast, I come in and click on episodes or new episode, and it's just going to keep getting added to this page, which is pretty amazing for the work of minutes, really. I'm going to enable RSS feeds. So I now have a subscribe link that I can give to my students. Subscribe to my podcast. Every week I'll be adding this, this, and this, and this. We have that link to give to them. And that's the difference between a subscription link, which will update their own apps to receive the podcast, and the actual homepage of the entire channel. So there's a distinction there between, I could just give them the link each week to my podcasts, which are now live and published and collecting data, I suppose, stats, like Kim showed us before. But basically, we've just gone through the act of making a podcast channel and also getting a homepage, etc. What we can look at from this point, looking at our podcast that we have there, if I click on the share button, 2 bits of information. One is an individual link to the episode. There's my announcement for the week. Here you go, everybody. Here's the latest episode. Secondly, we get an embed code. Now, with an embed code, we don't really need to know anything about coding. I can take that, go to a subject site, for example. Let me find somewhere where I'm not going to do some damage. So, for example, in I2, and I just go and make a new content item in I2. Lachlan podcast. Into the content item, turn on the code view button, this one there, and I can Control V paste my embed code. And it's there. So that podcast that I've made has now become a part of my learning materials, essentially. It's down the bottom. We'll move it to the top. There we go. So I now have an embedded media option for my audio recordings as part of my learning materials. I have a link to give students if I want to make it dynamic in that sense, rather than part of learning materials, but it's ready to roll. Right, so you can see how quick that process is for creating podcasts for whatever you want to use them for. Kim showed us a whole bunch of different use cases and how whether they were using them for intensive schools or to talk to industry professionals around assessment, all that sort of thing. And we've just signed up to Anchor and created audio content and distributed it in, I don't know, 15 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. And now every time you want to use it, you're basically going to that same website to Anchor, clicking on new episode, and away you go. That's it. So, I mean, if you want to get more into the nitty gritty around how this tool works in terms of distributing to other platforms, then you'll need to do a little bit, spend a bit more time looking at how it works, because a lot of other podcast distribution tools require you to pay basically to host your content on them. And then they allow you to generate revenue, for example, when people then subscribe to them. That's the broad philosophy for tools like, kind of Apple Podcasts and Spotify and other things. Spotify owns Anchor FM. So you get to make podcasts on Anchor for free, and then they sit on Spotify. But if people want to access them from Spotify, then they're going to end up having to subscribe to them because it owns the tool. That doesn't cost them anything. But if it's going out to other platforms that are paid, for example, then they might need to pay for those. I'm going to stop there for a second and see, firstly, Kim Bailey, would you like to throw into this mix about anything that I've been talking about, or maybe your experiences with Anchor and how much time you need to put into it when you want to add content into it, that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's really quick, and you can use it for so many different purposes. So I'd just say have a go, and you don't actually have to publish it in order to preview it as well. So you can actually listen to your own episode, decide if that's okay or not, and reshape it. And because you can click and drag across chunks, I really recommend, if you're doing something more than 10 minutes, that you record them in 10-minute chunks, so that if you do, do your first 10 minutes okay, but then in the second 10 minutes it doesn't go so well and you want to re-record it, you don't have to start right again at the beginning. You just move across that particular chunk of recording that you're doing before you publish your episode. So it's quite a good way and a flexible way of actually compiling material. But no, I really rate it. I do have 3 different email accounts so that I can cover my 3 subjects, because unfortunately we don't have a subscription license at CSU, but absolutely worthwhile and very positively received amongst students.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, editing. That is an excellent question, Ruth. Let's get into that. If I go back into my list of episodes, all of one of them, on my Anchor page, I can go back into the episode. Now, this is kind of giving me the ability to edit, I suppose, things like the description that's in there, and get a view of the different, I suppose, chunks that Kim was talking about. We had the initial audio and we had that transition, but I also have this lovely button right here, edit audio, and it takes us back to that continuum where we then have the opportunity to work with each of those different pieces. And if I click on the dots again next to each of those pieces, I can either get the file itself in its entirety, I can remove it from the continuum for the episode, or I can edit. And then the tool that is available inside Anchor is a very, very simple version of, I suppose, a tool like Audacity or other audio tools, where you can split and crop different pieces of audio from here and remove those. And I really would suggest that you have a bit of a play. Most of the time, it's people wanting to cut out bits and pieces, either if there are extended pauses where they were trying to get their thoughts together, or people are very self-conscious when creating their own content. That's been my experience over decades, I feel, whether it's screencasts or podcasts or vodcasts. The moment our own voice gets involved in a recording that we know is going to be put in front of other people, arguably the biggest hurdle, bigger than any technological hurdle, is just how self-conscious we are about our own finished product, how professional or polished it sounds. And I would say my biggest piece of advice, the most common one, is that it's okay just to be yourself and authentic, essentially, because that's far more realistic to students than something that has gone through a publishing team and a whole bunch of professionals washing the content. And I think that applies across the board to video content as well. It makes that idea of authentic learning actually authentic rather than kind of a catchphrase. Yeah, thanks, Ruth. I'd really encourage you to have a play with it. The editor is not by any means a sophisticated tool. It's not going to do anything like removing white noise or normalizing volume levels or any of the types of things if you've worked with editing audio at all before. If you want to do that sort of thing, then I would point you towards a free tool like Audacity, which you can download on any device, and that will allow you to work with your audio and do far more with the file. And as we saw before, you are able to upload your own audio from elsewhere into here. And you can see we have the ability to also drag in other files from your Explorer. So if you've recorded that audio from Zoom, mobile phone, whatever, as long as you've got an audio file, you can drag it in here and make it a part of your episode. A fairly recent addition to Anchor as well is the ability to add video content or vodcasts to the platform. Now, I haven't played around extensively with this, but basically what it allows you to do at that point is to have the video sitting alongside the audio playback. So look, I'm not really getting into the creation of vodcasts, but it is a new tool that has been added. They're only going to be able to watch that video if they view the content through Spotify. So this is something that Spotify has kind of paid for and is trying to drive more customers towards their platform. So it's you'll see that when we go into the idea of making a new episode, there is an option here that allows you to upload either audio or video files. But really the reason that we're kind of plugging Anchor is all around quick podcast creation and distribution to the students. Now, in light of all of that, I now want to bring you back into an i2 site to think about an alternative. If using Anchor is not to your taste, for example, or you're not really interested in distributing this as a podcast, and that is to look at the CSU Replay tool, which is in everybody's i2 site by default, Panopto. Now, I'm obliged to do this because this tool, CSU, does have a very expensive paid-for license to use to create and distribute audio and video content. And in the same way that we would make video in CSU Replay, we hit create and we launch the browser, the application for Panopto, which I'll click on here, but we can also drag in other audio if we had recorded that in Zoom. When we go to create content in Panopto, so I'm going to open the application now. We'll wait for that to launch. One of the benefits to using this application to make not just video content, but audio content as well, is that it's very, very quick to get it situated inside your learning materials. So you might be used to using CSU Replay and it's asking you to identify different sources like your video, webcam. I don't need a webcam. I'm recording audio today, just a podcast, so I can turn off the video. I'm also not going to be sharing my screen. All I'm capturing at this point is just my microphone. So the end result is going to be an audio file that is embedded. And I can see whilst I'm talking, this green line's going up and down, so it's picking up the mic. Great. Start the recording. And at this point, the timer is on, so it's capturing me. I'm saying, right, this week we're going to be looking at blah, 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 blah. And we're getting our captured recording audio file. You can pause it and keep going if you need to, or we can hit stop. It's now going to publish that recording. Don't worry about putting in a description. It doesn't appear anywhere that students can view it anyway. So I'm going to just click on done. You can also trash it and go again if you want to. It then very quickly just published that file. Don't worry too much about this Manage Recordings tab. If you wanted to go back and make another audio file, you could, but for the purpose of today, I'm done. So I'm going to close this little dialog box and go back into my subject site and refresh. And what I'm hoping to see once it publishes right here is going to be my recording that I just made. Right. So we're getting 16 seconds worth of amazing content. That may not be the one that I just made. Let's have a look. And at this point, the timer is on, so it's okay, beautiful. So what we see is that that file sitting in my Panopto folder has been created. Because it's by default, its primary purpose is for video, right? So it's opening up in this full screen kind of view of video, but don't be distracted by that for the moment. It's published. We have a link to the content. I can download an audio file. I can open the Panopto editor if I wanted to. And that editor is slightly more sophisticated. We get a continuum underneath that allows us to crop and cut pieces of the audio file. There's no video in here at the moment, but if you wanted to do things after the fact to this file, like add in PowerPoint slides, you could add slides in to accompany the audio. It's kind of a backwards way of doing things in my head, because if I was going to make slides with audio, I'd open PowerPoint and record in PowerPoint. I wouldn't be going and making audio and then trying to back end slides, but you can do that. You can add in things like captions and turn on the auto captioning that's available. You can see it's already picked up those captions next to the audio file. If I wanted to add an interactive quiz within Panopto to go alongside my audio, I could do that. To me, at the moment, I'm already talking myself out of this, to be honest, but I can use this tool to create audio content, which is now sitting inside my Panopto folder, ready to be made available somewhere else. Now, if I did that, I could click on share, and this is the same process we use for video. I can get either a link, and again, I'm distributing a link. It might be in an announcement, might be somewhere else to students, which will allow them to play back that audio. I can also get an embed code and put that directly within a subject site, exactly what we were doing a minute ago in that other spot that Lachlan has lost. Far out. Okay. Let's try in this subject site. There it is, embedded objects. If I now went to make another item inside, sorry, I'm getting pulled up by the amount of content I have embedded in this site. Here we go. Right. I'm going to build content. I'm going to make an item. This time we have CSU Replay audio. And we have two ways of doing this with Panopto. We either take that embed code that we copied, open up the embed button and paste it. You'll see the code's a lot longer than the one from Anchor. Not that that matters, but suppose there's more to it. It gives us this kind of compressed view. I'm not liking it. I hit submit. It'll be at the bottom of the page. Let's have a look. And that's what it looks like by default within the subject site. So I can't say that I'm particularly jazzed by this, but that's what your embedded audio looks like when you first create it. You'll see that your student can download the file, open it in a full browser view, show the captions as it's playing. So this is potentially one avenue that you might like. This is the captioning aspect whilst the audio is playing. It's capturing me. I'm saying, right, this week we're going to be looking at blah, 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 blah. You see those captions underneath? And we're getting our captured recording audio file. Right, so we have embedded audio within the subject site. It's taken us a bit longer than using Anchor, but the end result is this situated CSU branded captionable piece of embedded audio that we can use and that students could download. The other aspect to using CSU Replay instead of Anchor is that inside your CSU Replay folders, you may or may not be aware that there is a subscribe button up here with these radio waves. When you go into that, you've got a number of different options, but basically you can get an audio only RSS feed that you then might provide to your students. Again, that same idea of getting them to subscribe to your channel. But what this does is that every time you add any content to Panopto in your subject site, the students will get that content as part of their updates. So this is starting to get to a very, very specific use case of how you're going to use your CSU Replay folder. I'm using it as my podcast channel, and every time I add content into Replay, the students will be able to subscribe to that, to be able to download and listen to that content wherever they are. It's quite a specific use case because it also basically says anything I don't want students to listen or see, etc. I can't use CSU Replay for that. So I'm almost only using that tool for this process. So it's, as I said, it's quite a specific use case, and I haven't seen it done anywhere yet, but the possibility is there. You'll notice the difference between audio only, just getting podcasts, and above, subscribe to iTunes and RSS above, which would give them access to the video as well as part of the subscription. So I don't want to kind of overwhelm you with all of the options, etc., that potentially are available, but I'm obligated to basically say we have a supported, paid for enterprise tool for creating multimedia content, video or audio. That's Panopto. you can add content to your Panopto folders and make it available to students through the subscription process. Having said all of that, I would still be throwing you back towards Anchor FM and saying, cloud-based, this is not based on whether or not CSU has or does not have a particular tool at any given time. We change the tools that we use from time to time, and I don't want my content to kind of disappear. So I like the idea of an independent cloud-based tool for making content. It took us minutes, and we were basically had content available and distributed, and probably in a medium that students are more comfortable with, them just subscribing and listening to those podcasts. Kim, feedback from students about podcasts and accessing them, let's say, in different places, like that accessibility aspect. Have you had any?
Yes, a lot. So I get feedback in SCS surveys saying that they listen to them in the car, on the way to work, on the train. They really value them. But interestingly as well, they have actually asked for podcasts to be made available in all of our subjects now across the whole law degree, not just in the subjects that I teach. So they've become a really popular medium, and we're getting a bit of a groundswell from our students. So it's clearly catering to mobile devices and to a different way of learning, which is very much the online learner today. And if you think about your typical CSU student, first in family, time poor, often working, it makes a lot of sense if you can download a concept lecture or this week's blurb from your lecturer while you're driving to work or doing what you're doing, going for a walk or a run.
Yeah, and I guess was thinking about it in terms of how much pressure we have at the moment on our Zoom meetings, like our one online meeting that we have for the week, to basically make meaning of the learning experience in its entirety. Like that is our one opportunity to engage directly with students in person. Never mind the ones watching the recording later, that's a value add, but like the actual chance to have, direct engagement, live engagement with the students. And what do we do with that time? Like there's a massive scope in there. Some people, have very explicit structure with what they do with their online meetings. I'm going to focus on assessment, or I'm going to use it to present more kind of content at the students, or whether it's slide based, or use it as an opportunity for lectures, or other people troubleshoot, problem solve. There is so much pressure on that one space, that one period of time, to somehow consolidate everything else that has been provided through these subject sites. I feel that is a tremendous risk potentially and pressure on that one thing. And anything that can help take some of the hot air out of that and add further kind of opportunity for not just authenticity, but that meaning making aspect, and make meaning of everything else in there in the subject site, like podcasting, is an opportunity probably too good to miss, I think, for how easy it is to do. That's my take on it anyway. But look, we're almost at time. I'm going to basically have a look at a couple of bits that we have at the end of this slide deck. We had a look at using Anchor FM, a walkthrough. In the slide deck, there's also a cheat sheet on how to work with Anchor. Panopto, there's plenty of resources around. Again, they're linked to in the slide deck on how to use those. I just had mentioned Zoom a number of times tonight, and that's because a lot of us are getting very comfortable with using Zoom for just about everything as a starting point. And I would suggest, particularly when you're having, well, not just but if you're having conversations with peers or people in industry or those interviews, etc., you don't need any other kind of software or platforms or tools other than what we already have. You can have a Zoom meeting with someone, grab the audio file at the end of it, put it into Anchor, and you have a podcast. It's as simple as that, if it's either by yourself or with other people. We are not going to spend time looking today really at, these aggregators, these tools, but I have mentioned them here. There are 3 that I make note of, and these are tools that students or yourself can use to subscribe to podcasts. Pocket Casts is free and will allow you to subscribe to just about anything, as long as you have the RSS feed, or you can go searching for it. But basically, the easiest way to do it is to get the RSS feed. If you've got it on a computer or something and you want to get it on your phone, which is where the app is going to live, grab the RSS feed and email it to yourself. Then you open the email on your phone and you have the RSS feed. INO Reader is also has an app version, but basically it's a very no-frills aggregator of podcasts if you want them all in a kind of a dashboard view. So you can look at all of your podcasts. It also gives you more data on what's happening with your podcasts. But it has a limitation that basically says you can only have 5 of your podcast feeds that you're keeping track of at any one time. So any more than that, you got to start paying for it. Pocket Casts, no limitation, as many as you like. And lastly, Podbean is sometimes mentioned to me usually by practitioners in DLT that have used it, that have liked it. Podbean does not allow you to create podcasts. It only allows you to collect and listen to podcasts and also to distribute your own. So it's a distribution platform. Probably safe to say I don't like it because I find it's too limited and really it's not doing what I want, which is to create the audio. And that's usually what I'm looking at these apps for. The free account version also only allows you to host 5 hours of content in total. So let's say that we're into week 6 and we've been adding 1 hour every week. If you were doing that, then you'd hit your cap and you wouldn't be able to use this tool anymore. So steer clear of Podbean would be my advice. I'm not going to go into the teaching ideas because I think we've covered a whole bunch of those today in terms of how Kim has been using it, how other practitioners have been using the tool. There's a slide in there at the end about tips and tricks. Probably the most important one in there, as we said, is to do with authenticity being far more important than production values. I think with podcasts, people want to hear your voice and your natural voice and you're thinking in this process rather than something that you've potentially scripted and recorded 20 times. Do yourself a favor, I guess, and trust that how you sound naturally is arguably of more value. Having said that, I know some people speak very, very quickly. If that happens, maybe have a think about it with your pace and get some feedback. If you're one of these people that absolutely just blast through what you're trying to say, you might need to think about pacing a little bit. All right, I think that's going to do us. Lastly, I think I have to say a big thank you to Kim Bailey for coming along this morning and sharing her insights into how she's been using Anchor and continues to use Anchor. And to the two of you as well this morning, Stephen and Ruth, thank you very much for coming out and having a listen. If you've got any comments or questions, etc., I'm going to hang around for a little bit, but I will turn the recording off at that point and say, yeah, have a great week. Other than that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ruth. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lachlan and Kim. A question for you with Anchor.